A tourist thought his dog could break a royal guard, but what happened next silenced an entire crowd at Buckingham Palace. What if I told you that a highly trained military guard didn't need weapons, didn't flinch under pressure, and disarmed a dangerous situation with nothing but calm hands and a deep understanding of loyalty? Stay with us, because this isn't just a story about a man and a dog. It's about dignity, restraint, and the quiet power of true authority. And trust me, the ending will leave you stunned. If you care about real-life heroes, about the noble role of animals, and about what real leadership looks like, then hit that like button, subscribe, and share where you're watching from in the comments. Stick around till the very end, because how this bulldog reacts might just restore your faith in human decency. The morning sun cast a golden light over the historic stones of Buckingham Palace. Tourists chatted, cameras clicked, and kids ran about, marveling at the bright uniforms of the Queen's Guard. But everything changed when Derek Malone, a thick-set man in his 40s with inked arms and a hard edge to his voice, entered the square. He held the leash of a stocky bulldog named Brutus, whose low growl seemed to ripple through the crowd like a warning siren. But it wasn't just the dog. It was Derek's smug tone, his deliberate steps toward the guard post, and his unnerving smile that made people uneasy. And there, standing tall in crisp formation, was Sergeant Edward Langford, silent, still, and watching. Not with fear, but with absolute focus. The gentle murmur of conversation faded into nervous silence as Derek Malone tugged hard on Brutus's leash, dragging the dog closer to the Queen's Guard. His voice was loud now, mocking, taunting. "What's the matter, soldier? Can't even blink, huh? Let's see what you do when something real comes at you." Brutus, a 70-pound bulldog with a wide chest and heavy jowls, growled deep in his throat. The leash tightened and slackened again. Derek clearly knew what he was doing. It wasn't random. This was staged, controlled aggression. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer. One older woman whispered, "He shouldn't be doing that," while gripping her husband's arm. A veteran standing nearby stepped forward, his lips tight with concern. But Sergeant Edward Langford, his boots planted firmly, didn't move an inch. At first glance, he looked like any other ceremonial guard. Tall bearskin hat, polished brass buttons, and a posture as steady as marble. But inside that uniform was a man shaped by war zones, not parade grounds. 2 tours in Syria had taught him how to read a threat without showing a flicker of fear. He watched everything. Derek's clenched jaw, the twitch in Brutus's shoulders, even the way the man's voice changed pitch to rile the animal. His pulse remained steady. Edward knew this wasn't just about a disrespectful tourist. This was a dangerous game of dominance, with a living creature being weaponized in front of civilians, children, and families. And he also knew one wrong move and someone could be hurt. The air thickened and time slowed. Brutus was now less than 6 feet away. The guard didn't flinch, because when trained right, the calmest person in the chaos is the most dangerous of all. Just as Brutus lunged forward, jaws wide, muscles flexed, the crowd gasped in horror. His heavy paws pounded the stone ground, his momentum unmistakable. But Sergeant Edward Langford didn't blink. He didn't raise his arms, didn't shout. Instead, he moved with precision honed in battlefields. In a single, smooth motion, he dropped into a crouch, his gloved hands extended with calm authority, not force. Time slowed for the crowd, but for Edward, it was a pattern he'd seen before. In combat zones, he'd handled military dogs. He'd learned their fears, their instincts, and most importantly, how to speak their language without saying a word. As Brutus charged, something unexpected happened. He hesitated. Just before impact, the dog's body flinched, not from fear, but from confusion. His eyes darted, ears flicked back. This wasn't what he'd been trained for. The man in front of him, so calm, so grounded, wasn't reacting like a victim. He was commanding. Edward's hands found precise pressure points, gently yet firmly redirecting the dog's force. Brutus hit the ground, not hard, but guided. His growl replaced by a low, conflicted whine. He was breathing hard, but not resisting. "Easy there, soldier," Edward whispered, his voice low, steady. "You're better than this." The crowd stood frozen, unable to believe what they were witnessing. A full-speed attack neutralized, without violence. No strikes, no shouting, just understanding. Brutus looked up at Edward, his tail giving a cautious wag. It was as if, beneath all the aggression, the dog recognized something ancient and true. Leadership. From the sidelines, Derek's voice cracked in disbelief. "No, Brutus, get up, get him." But the dog didn't move. Instead, Brutus turned fully toward Edward and slowly rolled onto his back, a universal sign of submission. His belly exposed, his growls replaced by a low, peaceful grunt. The silence was deafening. A child whispered, "He saved the dog." And suddenly the mood shifted from fear to awe. Edward had done more than stop an attack. He had reclaimed a soul that had been twisted by cruelty. Even those who had seen military discipline before had never seen it used like this. The moment felt sacred, a god who stood still until it mattered. For a long moment, everything stood still. Brutus, once snarling and rigid with tension, now lay stretched out like a puppy, breathing calmly at Sergeant Edward Langford's feet. His tail gave a slow, uncertain thump against the stone. But the silence didn't come from fear anymore. It came from pure disbelief. A woman near the front, perhaps in her 60s, clasped her hands to her mouth. Her eyes welled with tears. She had seen enough in her life to know that what had just happened wasn't luck. It was understanding, earned through experience. "Ben Dog, he didn't want to fight," she whispered. Nearby, a man with a veteran's cap nodded solemnly. "No, ma'am. He just needed someone who remembered what he was bred for." The crowd's fear melted into fascination. Children peeked from behind parents, seeing not a monster, but a misunderstood creature finally treated with care. People weren't just watching a royal guard anymore. They were watching a man repair something broken. And Derek Malone? He was unraveling. His voice, once booming and smug, now cracked with disbelief. "What's wrong with you? He listens to me. I raised him." Edward didn't speak to Derek, not yet. His hands continued working calmly along Brutus's neck and shoulders, pressing points that released tension, grounding the dog. He whispered gentle cues only a trained animal would understand. Brutus, for the first time in what looked like years, trusted someone. That's when Edward finally stood, not quickly, not dramatically, but with quiet confidence. His gloved hand still rested on Brutus's head. "You didn't raise him," he said softly, locking eyes with Derek. "You used him." His words didn't need volume, they had weight. "You turned loyalty into fear, but even now, he remembers who he really is." The crowd's perception shifted like a tide turning. Where Derek once seemed intimidating, now he just looked small, not because of his height or his loud voice, but because the man who stood still had proven to be stronger in every way that mattered. Brutus no longer even glanced at Derek. His eyes were fixed on Edward. A young girl stepped forward from the crowd, her voice barely a whisper. "Is he going to be okay?" Edward looked at her and smiled for the first time. "He's going to be just fine." And in that moment, the real transformation wasn't just in Brutus. It was in everyone watching. They'd come for a ceremonial photo, but left having witnessed a lesson in dignity, strength, and grace. Just as the crowd began to breathe again, Uniformed officers arrived at the edge of the scene, 2 from the local police force and 1 wearing the distinct badge of the Royal Animal Welfare Service. The lead officer, a composed woman in her 50s with graying hair tucked beneath a cap, approached carefully. Her sharp eyes scanned Brutus, still calm at Sergeant Edward Langford's side. "Military handling?" she asked quietly. Edward gave a respectful nod, not taking his eyes off Brutus. 3 years with the Royal Army Veterinary Corps, specialized in the rehabilitation of military working dogs. She knelt slowly, allowing Brutus to sniff her hand. The dog's body remained relaxed, but his eyes followed Edward's subtle gestures. A flick of 2 fingers, a silent command. Brutus responded with ease, sitting upright and steady. "Well," she smiled softly, "this one remembers the right training." The officers exchanged looks of professional recognition. What had looked like a public safety incident had transformed into something rare, a case of recovery in real time. Edward stood and gave a soft pat on Brutus's broad shoulders. "It was never the problem," he said. "It was the man holding the leash." All eyes turned to Derek Malone, who had grown visibly pale. One officer read him his rights while the crowd watched, silent now but with unmistakable disapproval. The same audience he tried to control with fear now bore witness to his failure. "You can't take my dog," he protested, voice rising in panic. "I've got papers. He's mine." The animal welfare officer didn't raise her voice. "Ownership is not the same as responsibility, Mr. Malone. What we saw today was not care. It was cruelty with intent." While officers took Derek aside, the animal services team brought out a proper service lead and harness. But before they could use it, Edward gave one last, silent command. Brutus stood, wagged his tail once, and walked calmly to the officer, as if he knew he was going somewhere better. "We have rehabilitation programs for dogs like him," she explained to the crowd. "Specialized units, search and rescue, therapy dogs for veterans. He still has value, more than most people realized." Edward knelt one last time beside Brutus. He whispered something only the dog could hear, scratched behind his ears and stepped back with military precision. "You'll do well," he said softly. "You just needed someone to see you." The crowd began to applaud, not loud and rowdy, but respectful and full of emotion. It was the kind of applause that didn't just celebrate heroism. It honored redemption. That day, Brutus didn't just walk away from his owner. He walked toward a new purpose. And behind him, standing tall and silent once more, Sergeant Langford resumed his post. The sun had shifted higher now, casting longer shadows behind the palace gates. The ceremonial buzz that usually defined Buckingham Palace had faded. What remained was something quieter, deeper, a shared understanding among those who had just witnessed the extraordinary. Sergeant Edward Langford returned to his post, resuming his upright stance. But for the crowd, he was no longer just a man in a red tunic and bearskin hat. He was something far more human. Tourists didn't just take pictures anymore. They stood still, many in reverent silence. Some whispered to each other about his calmness, his control. Others wiped away quiet tears. "And it didn't just stop the dog," an older gentleman murmured to his wife. "And saved him." A small group of schoolchildren, who earlier had huddled in fear, now gathered with curious wonder. Their teacher, herself visibly moved, leaned down and explained gently, "You see, kid, real strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, and people and animals listen when it's real." Across the square, Brutus, now fitted with a secure harness, waited beside the animal welfare officer. But he was no longer pacing, no longer growling. His head was high, his eyes alert, but trusting. It was clear to everyone the dog had changed, but more importantly, he'd been given the chance to. The transformation didn't just happen in Brutus, it happened in the crowd too. People began to see past the ceremonial uniform. They saw the soldier behind it, the healer, the man who didn't need to shout or strike to command respect. Several visitors approached the officers, asking about adoption programs, animal rehabilitation, or just sharing their own stories of pets, of military service, of second chances. One man, a Vietnam veteran with a silver cane, approached the welfare officer quietly. "If there's a way I can help that dog," he said, voice cracking. "I'd like to. I've seen enough pain in my life." "Maybe he and I could help each other." She smiled kindly. "You wouldn't be the first. We'll get in touch." Even Derek Malone, now seated in the back of a police car, seemed changed. Not redeemed, not forgiven, but cracked open in some small way. His face was blank, not defiant. He stared at Brutus with the look of someone realizing he never really knew the animal he called his own. And still, Edward remained motionless at his post, not demanding praise, not soaking in the glory, just standing, serving, silent. But the memory of what had just happened stayed loud in the hearts of everyone who had seen it, because what they witnessed wasn't just a dramatic moment. It was a man's quiet reminder that no matter how far someone or something has fallen, with the right touch, the right guidance, and the right heart, there's always a way back. As the final police vehicle rolled away and the last camera shutters clicked, a hush returned to the square outside Buckingham Palace. But this time, the silence wasn't laced with fear. It was filled with respect. Sergeant Edward Langford stood motionless once again, his white gloves clasped around the ceremonial rifle, his back straight and his eyes forward. But to everyone who had been there, who had watched a man diffuse violence without raising his voice or his hand, he had become something far more than a symbol of tradition. He had become a symbol of quiet authority, compassion, and moral clarity. Behind the crowd, the animal welfare officer loaded Brutus into a service vehicle, not with force, but with gentle reassurance. The Bulldog looked back, just once. His eyes met Edward's in a moment that held the weight of something unspoken. Gratitude. Trust had replaced fear. Confidence had replaced confusion. And just like that, a new future began, not just for Brutus, but for everyone who witnessed his change. A young boy in a wheelchair sitting at the front with his grandfather pointed toward the guard and whispered, "Grandpa, that man didn't even get scared." His grandfather, a Korean War veteran, nodded slowly. "'Cause he wasn't scared, son, he was prepared." That moment summed it all up, not in grand speeches or news headlines, but in the quiet lesson passed between generations. Nearby, parents began speaking to their children, not about fear, but about courage, with control, compassion backed by strength, and the importance of responsibility when it comes to animals, power, and leadership. And Edward? He never turned to the applause, never gestured for recognition, because true service never needs an audience. It just does the right thing when no one else will. For those who stayed until the very end, something had shifted. They didn't just witness a confrontation. They saw the restoration of something sacred. The idea that goodness, done quietly, still has a place in our world. A dog had been changed, a crowd had been reminded, and a man, in a red coat and tall hat, had shown us what it truly means to lead with honor. What would you have done? Imagine standing still in a crisp uniform, alone before a sea of people, with a snarling bulldog only seconds away from lunging at you. And the man holding the leash doesn't just allow it, he dares it to happen. Most of us, even with the best of intentions, might have stepped back, flinched, reacted out of instinct, fear, or self-preservation. And who could blame us? We're human. The sound of growling, the tension in the air, the uncertainty of what comes next. It's the kind of fear that bypasses logic. But Sergeant Edward Langford didn't react like most people. He responded with experience, compassion, and a deep sense of purpose. Now pause and ask yourself honestly, if I were in his shoes, what would I have done? Maybe you'd try to signal someone for help. Maybe you'd raise your voice. Maybe you'd freeze, unsure of how to respond to such raw aggression. But what made Edward's response powerful wasn't just that he neutralized a threat. It was how he did it, with complete composure, without escalation, and by speaking the language of the creature others saw as dangerous. And in doing so, he revealed something profound. True leadership doesn't come from fear, it comes from empathy and knowledge. This story teaches us something deeply valuable, not just about animals or guards, but about ourselves, about how we choose to respond when confronted with aggression, intimidation, or even injustice. We live in a world where loud voices often get the most attention, where people mistake power for dominance and fear for respect. But what Sergeant Langford demonstrated was the exact opposite. He showed that restraint is not weakness, that patience is not passivity, that calm control is one of the strongest forces a person can wield. For older viewers, especially those who've lived through decades of change, conflict, and cultural shifts, you know better than most that it's not always the loudest who lead best. Sometimes it's the quiet figure who waits, watches, and only acts when wisdom. It's easy to lose patience in today's world. It's easy to raise your voice, to respond to anger with more anger. But what this story shows us is that the power of stillness, understanding, and training can often diffuse situations more effectively than force ever could. So what can we learn and apply? If you've raised children or grandchildren, you know, yelling rarely works, but a calm voice, a listening ear, and consistent care, those things shape lives. If you're a veteran, a teacher, or a caretaker, you've seen what respect and discipline can do. If you've ever owned a dog, you know the difference between obedience through fear and loyalty through love. In your own life, you may never face a charging bulldog, but you will face hostile people, difficult moments, and stressful choices. Ask yourself, will I escalate? Or will I breathe, observe, and lead through understanding? Just like Edward Langford, you have a choice every day, to be reactive or to be wise. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Did it move you? Did it remind you of something from your own life? Do you believe we need more people like Sergeant Langford in this world? We want to hear your thoughts. Scroll down and leave a comment. We read every single one. If you believe true strength comes from compassion, hit that like button. If you think this world needs more stories like this, subscribe to our channel. And if you've ever experienced a moment where calmness saved the day, share it in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else today. Don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss our daily stories about quiet courage, dignity, and real-life heroes like the Royal Guard. Because in a world filled with noise, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay still and lead.